Well, hi everybody. This is Paul. Welcome to this Delivering Value with Management of Portfolios webinar with myself and Roxanne. The webinar is going to take about 45 minutes and then there'll be time for some questions too. So let's get going. First of all, just with a little bit of administration. First of all, if you need any support or want to chat during the call, then there is a chat application top right hand corner of your screen. I'm going to kind of MC it, so I should see anything that comes through. If you have any questions, then just send them in by chat or keep them to the end, and then what we'll do at the end is we'll pick up all the questions and we'll have a question session at the end. So what's going to happen right now is I'm going to mute everybody's lines just so that whatever's happening where you are doesn't come down the line and get shared with everybody else. So just give me a moment and I will do that. Here we go. Okay, I think that is most lines muted. If anybody comes in during the call, then I will just jump in and mute them. The session also is being recorded, so once we've finished the call, we'll clean up the audio and make a recording available to you. So let's get going. Just very briefly talk about Advantage Learning, which is the company that's bringing you the call today. It's an accredited training organization for the Management of Portfolios standard. And in fact, Advantage Learning, we ran the world's first Management of Portfolios class in Edinburgh, United Kingdom, back in March 2011. Very shortly after that, we ran the first class in Canada, which took place in Ottawa. And we actually have a 100% pass rate in the Management of Portfolios exams, which is a good record. It's hard to have, but so far we've managed to keep it, and we're very proud of that. Across Canada, which I know there's people calling in from all around the world today, but mostly Canada, we've certified over 1,600 Canadian project managers in best practice standards. And as an organization, we are incorporated in the United Kingdom, where I'm calling from today, and in Canada, where Roxanne, my co-host, is. So, moving on to Roxanne, to whom I'm going to hand over in a moment. Roxanne is an experienced trainer and presenter. She has been working in portfolio management for a while, so not only is she a trainer, she has experience in the field that she'll share with you, and that goes over 20 years of project management experience in North America. From a certification point of view, Roxanne was the first ever Canadian to be certified as an MOP trainer. She's an MOP registered practitioner and also registered in the Prince 2 project management standard that you may be familiar or aware of. She's a CMA and, of course, also a project management professional. She's an excellent tutor. I'm proud and privileged to work with her. Just share with you a little quote from one of her students late last year who said 6 on a scale of 5, which was quite a nice comment. So with that, I will hand you over to Roxanne, who will talk about management of portfolios.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody from across the country. It's great to see you all online. So let's just start off, first of all, with the objectives for today's session. One of the things we want to talk about, first of all, is how we manage the discretionary spending. So, for example, all the projects and programs that we do within organizations come with a financial investment, and organizations obviously have limited amounts of money, so we need to figure out ways to manage that discretionary spending. We also want to talk about the link between the projects that are approved or ongoing within organizations and the strategy that hopefully they're there to help realize. So ideally what we have at the end of a good portfolio management practice is a clear line of sight around the work that we're doing and how that work is going to help us achieve our strategic objectives. And at the end of the session, Paul's actually going to give you a link where you can find a portfolio management health check. And essentially, it's a checklist that you can use to evaluate your current health and maturity level, if you will, within the organization. So it'll help you to analyze where you maybe have some gaps for further implementation or evaluation. And we'll also tell you a little bit about the portfolio management certification. Paul mentioned that there are 1,600 people within Canada right now that have that certification. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that. And we'll obviously try and answer your questions as well. So one of the questions, I guess, first off is, what is portfolio management? And this was an interesting question that somebody asked me once. Because, he kind of said, well, portfolio to me sounds like, your investments that you make in your financial portfolio. And if you think about it, all the change that we introduce in organizations through projects and programs are financial investments. So a portfolio is that collection of changes that will help us to achieve those strategic objectives. So it's a combination of projects and programs that are all working in concert to help us realize those objectives. Portfolio management, then, is that collection of processes and decisions that help us to ensure that the changes that we introduce into the business are actually balanced in terms of the resource allocations, the money that we have to spend, our risk exposure, some of the dependencies between those change initiatives, to ensure that what we're investing in and what we're delivering into the business will actually not disrupt that business inappropriately, that we just, we can't continue to run. So some of the things that we'll look at through this methodology are the tools and techniques and practices to ensure that we have that balance. Now, the other thing we're going to give you at the end of this session is an article that is based on a survey done by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And it's actually a very interesting survey of CEOs and the results of some of that. And really, at the end of the day, some of the comments that you'll see throughout the survey is that there really is a need to be far more agile when we're executing strategies, because we are living in an ever-changing environment. So leaders have to not only just ask for change, but they have to invest in it. They have to take those ideas and the vision and actually turn it into results. And that's really what portfolio management is focused on. It's about ensuring that we're doing the right things and we're prioritizing all of the change initiatives so that we are actually aligned to realize strategy. So if you're using a really clear portfolio management strategy, you've got a prioritization process that uses those objective criteria to figure out what are the best things to invest in. So it kind of removes the gaming, if you will, and hopefully will remove some of those pet projects that sometimes get undertaken within organizations that at the end of the day don't realize that's a lot of value. We should also talk about what portfolio management is not. One of the things that is really important to understand is that portfolio management is about implementing processes and practices. It doesn't have to be expensive. And in fact, there are lots of software providers, for example, out there that would say, here's an IT solution that we have for you. But in fact, it's better to almost figure out what your processes and practices will be for portfolio management before you go down the path of actually investing a lot of money in an IT solution. So I've worked with clients and we'll use, you can create templates in Word and you can use Excel for dashboarding. There are other techniques that you can use or other tools that you can use that aren't that expensive and really aren't that sophisticated. The other thing about the management of portfolio methodology is that it uses a lot of what's referred to as light techniques, which really are just common sense approaches to implementing the methodology. So it doesn't have to be that sophisticated. The other thing that is important to understand is that if you have relatively low project or program management maturity, that's okay. That's not an inhibitor to implementing portfolio management. So what you'll find is if you implement portfolio management, you're going to be introducing some standard corporate processes for business case development and how projects get approved, how they get monitored. So what you'll find is that through those common processes, you'll actually start to build some maturity level from the project and program level as well, if that's an area that you're currently weak in. So don't think that you have to have good maturity level there in order to do portfolio management, because you don't. The other really big misconception, and I've run into this one now a few times, is people think that, well, if we do our project management really well and we do our program management really well, our portfolio management just kind of looks like program management, or portfolio management looks like program management on a bigger scale. And that's actually not true. The way that portfolio management is really defined is very, very different than projects or programs. So let's take a look at some of those differences, just so you've got a bit of a positioning around the two. Portfolio management, if you think about it, is a permanent structure. So in other words, portfolio management sits between your strategic planning function and the delivery of change through programs and projects. So your portfolio management function is a permanent structure that is always ensuring that the change that you're delivering reflects the strategies that you have in place. And if those strategies shift, then so should the projects and programs potentially. So it's a permanent structure, a function that stays in place. Whereas projects and programs are temporary. So in other words, a project has a start and an end date. When that project is done, we close it down, and we close down the teams, and we archive, and it's completed. So there's a very different nature around how those two functions are set up. From a scope perspective, portfolio management is really focused on strategy and ensuring that there's a portfolio of projects that align with your strategy. On the project and program level, it's more about the management and execution of delivering the outputs and the benefits that have been perpetrated within the business case initially. So then from a deliverable perspective, the portfolio is really focused on having that aligned portfolio. Project and program management is about outputs and benefits. So at the end of a project, there's some kind of new product or service that gets implemented into the business and hopefully is aligned to provide the benefits. Now, just to put another context around that, because the project and program management is temporary, a lot of times there isn't anybody that's looking at that final product that gets delivered into the business to say, did it really realize the value that we expected it to deliver? So the portfolio function is really there to look at that longer term, look at the product to say, did it actually get implemented correctly? Did it actually realize us the benefits? And if not, we need to go back to the business planning cycle or maybe to the business case development in order to improve that the next time around. So from a priorities perspective, on the portfolio level, we're really looking to ensure that we're delivering the right things. Are we doing the right projects and the right programs that will help us realize strategy? Whereas on the project and program management side, it's about doing things the right way. So this methodology coming out of the UK, management of portfolios, it was actually developed in 2011. And it is, as Paul mentioned, it is standards that are used worldwide. And it's certainly gaining popularity here in Canada and the US. And we've seen some clients, both in government, in utility companies, not-for-profit. We've seen it in for-profit organizations work effectively. So it really is something that can apply across any type of industry and have it work for you. And we will drill down, I'm going to drill down a little bit in the methodology throughout this session. So we'll take a little bit of a look around the principles and some of the practices at a high level. And the whole idea is that you can tailor this methodology to suit your organization. The methodology is also part of a larger suite of methodologies. Now, management of portfolio, or MOP, is the portfolio one that we're going to talk about today. As we talked about, portfolio management is about doing the right things and ensuring that the benefits get realized later on. Other methodologies that are connected to it, although not necessarily dependent on MOP. So you don't need to have managing successful projects or PRINCE2 methodologies in place in order to implement MOP. Although if you look at those methodologies, there are some common themes throughout them. So you may find as you're implementing MOP that you want to borrow some of those other ideas, for example, from MSP or PRINCE2 in your implementation as well, just because there's lots of common sense stuff in there that you can apply. But as I said, there's no requirement that you implement both of those. Now, putting management of portfolio into a strategic context, one of the things that we've talked about so far is that projects are the way that we introduce change into organizations. And presumably that change is going to help us from a strategic realization perspective. So one of the things that portfolio management is trying to do or attempting to do is ensure that the change we introduce into the business is actually being well managed so that the business can adopt the change and adapt to the change. So, you know, I've worked in organizations where you have real siloed type thinking, and what sometimes gets missed is that within those silos, there's projects that are being approved that will actually impact on the same business areas. And what will happen is at some point you get to the realization that the business can't actually handle all of that change at one time. So it creates disruption into the project management cycle. So what portfolio management is attempting to do is say, well, here's all the change initiatives we have on the go. How do we best align them so that that change is actually being delivered into the business in a more acceptable manner, if you will, so that those strategic objectives can actually be realized and the benefits can actually be realized as well. So that's really what we're trying to do from a portfolio management is A, pick the right projects in order to realize strategy, and then figure out how to implement them so that we are able to continue running the business and not disrupting the business through our change. This slide is interesting because it kind of shows the whole intent around selecting the right initiatives. What you see on this diagram is that we have a number of change initiatives that are connected in some way, or hopefully in some way, to the benefits that are connected to the strategic objectives and eventually to the strategy itself. Now, when we're looking at all of the change that's happening in an organization, we're able to see how the various change initiatives are actually connected. So we can then start to realize that we have initiatives like this one here in white that maybe has benefits, but they aren't benefits that are linked to strategic objectives. So those become those initiatives that we evaluate for potential elimination because they aren't actually deriving out the change that we need them to. We can also evaluate the change initiatives in terms of the benefits that they give us. And in this case, we see two change initiatives that are both contributing to a similar benefit. So as soon as you start consolidating all of those change initiatives, you may realize that you have two change initiatives that are trying to do the same thing. So either you bring them together and make them more efficient that way, or maybe you cancel one because there's a duplication. So that's one of the benefits of having this holistic view around portfolio management. Really what we're trying to do is ensure that all the initiatives in the portfolio are necessary, that they're sufficient, that there isn't a strategic objective, for example, that doesn't have any change initiative associated with it. We're also ensuring that the change initiatives are affordable and that they're achievable. Because the other thing we want to make sure that we can do is that we have capacity to deliver those things that we want to deliver. And if we don't have the capacity, we have to manage our expectations around that. So some of the benefits of portfolio management is certainly to ensure that the limited amount of money that we have is being spent in the right places. So this is our opportunity then to start looking at all of those changes in relationship to each other so that we're actually prioritizing and choosing those initiatives that are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of strategy. The other benefit is just being able to see the big picture And, you know, in working with clients, one of the things that I notice is as soon as you put a dashboard in front of an executive that has all of the initiatives that you're working on, the light bulbs go off. They start to see that bigger picture that they never knew before. When you're managing in silos, it's very easy for change initiatives to get buried at levels where you never know that they're actually happening. And so what good portfolio management does is it aggregates all of that change and allows the executive to see it all together so that they can make informed decisions around what are the right things that we should be doing in our organization. The other thing, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the other thing that happens is through portfolio management, you're starting to impose corporate standards on that PPM level or project program management level. So a bit of a top-down approach to ensure that you have better delivery. Some of the things that we do from a portfolio management is we look at all of our resources and we say, are we using our resources in the best places, in the places that are going to realize the best strategic benefits? We also look at dependencies to make sure that where we have projects and programs that are actually dependent on each other, that we recognize that and we schedule them appropriately so those projects don't get to the point where they're colliding in terms of those dependencies and then you have inefficiencies. And then, of course, the other one that we talked about is just generally the impact that we have on the business. And you can imagine if you have two projects that are both impacting the business in the same area, how inefficient they're going to get as they clamor for those same resources to help them kind of transition some of that change into production. So there's lots of benefits that you'll see from a delivery perspective by implementing good portfolio management practices. And then the other one is just, the other benefit is really just picking winners or picking those things that are going to help the organization move forward strategically and eliminating those initiatives that maybe aren't going to give you the good wins. And then I think we talked about this already, just about managing ambition, having a good understanding about what is all the change that we're trying to deliver and can we actually achieve that. And portfolio management is just helping the corporate executives to understand that bigger picture. And then the other big benefit, obviously, is aligning those change initiatives with strategic objectives. A lot of times in organizations, projects get born from the very lowest levels. And, you know, later on, if somebody says, well, why are we doing this? Then we look up and we say, well, let's see if I can find a strategic objective to kind of pin it to. And it doesn't always work all that well. So in the ideal world, what you're really doing is you've got your strategy and you're fleshing out all of those change initiatives from the top down. But we do know in organizations, sometimes projects are born at the lower level. So it's still ensuring that those initiatives are actually clearly linked to strategic objectives and are designed in a way to give us good business value. And then the last benefit on this slide anyway is just informed cost cutting. So having a better view of your priorities and the impact that those priorities will have on the business or on your client's business. So when we look at the methodology, the management of portfolio methodology, what you get in the methodology is it's really your how-to. Somebody was talking just before we got started today about how, you know, PMI doesn't necessarily give you all of that how-to. There's gaps in it. They'll tell you that you should have a methodology, but they don't tell you what that methodology should be. So what MOP is really doing is laying it all out for you. Within the methodology, there are 5 principles, and those 5 principles, we'll go through them in a moment, but those 5 principles really are the foundation, if you will, for the methodology. So we'll talk about some of those. There's also 2 cycles in the methodology. So one focused on definitions, and there's 5 practices in there, and there's one cycle focused on delivery, and there's 7 practices there. We'll do a high-level look at some of those in a moment. The methodology also comes with 5 role descriptions. So there's 2 governance committees. The terms of reference are provided in the methodology, and then there's 3 portfolio office role descriptions that are outlined as well. There's 7 light techniques. So these are just kind of common sense, simple approaches that you can take in your implementation. And then there's documentation templates included, the health checks included in there. The methodology also comes with lots of examples and research. And in class, obviously, we talk about a lot of examples as well. And the last bullet there just is kind of a wink, I guess, to some of the other methodologies. PRINCE2, for example, has PRINCE2 methodology, for example, has 300 pages in their methodology, whereas the MOP is only 100 pages. So not a huge amount of reading, hopefully. Okay, so let's take a look at the MOP principles. This guide really sums up the methodology in one very simple diagram. There's actually a lot of information behind these different circles. So we'll just kind of talk briefly about the principles in this slide. So the first one is senior management commitment. And just like any change commitment, change initiative, we need to ensure that there's a senior manager, somebody who sits at the executive table that can be a sponsor for the implementation or improvement of your portfolio management processes. So this person is out there championing, giving those positive messages, sitting at the table making decisions, doing all the right things to make you successful with your implementation. The second principle is around governance alignment. Now, when you're setting up portfolio management, what's important to do is ensure that the decision-making that's being made around the portfolio is aligned with the wider corporate governance model. If there's misalignment, then you've got an opportunity for people to go shopping for the decision that they want. So you want to avoid that ever happening by ensuring that your governance for your portfolio is aligned with the organizational governance. The third principle is around strategic alignment. One of the things that's important to understand is that MOP is not about developing strategy, it's about supporting strategy. So it sits, as I mentioned, in between your strategic planning function and the delivery function, which is your project and program management function. So you want to make sure that you've got that strategic alignment between the work that's being done and the work that is, and the plans that you had in place strategically. The other principle is to have a portfolio office. Really, you need to figure out how are you going to resource it so that you can be successful. So you need a function there that's going to, for example, define your procedures, provide assurance to the executive in terms of the delivery of those change initiatives, that's going to do some coordination, going to do some coaching, prepare the strategy, the portfolio strategy and the portfolio delivery plan, do some of those key things just to keep the portfolio management function actually operating. And then the fifth principle is around energized change culture. And I think we can all appreciate that, things, these kinds of things are about change. And change is hard for people. And you want to get them on board as most effectively as you can. And you need to build that positive energy. So we need to be able to demonstrate the value of portfolio management, how it's going to help us to achieve strategy. You need to get people rallying around common goals in order to make this successful. So that energized change culture and building that is very important to your eventual success. And certainly your senior management commitment is part of building that energy. So also on this slide, there's the two cycles are also notated. So we've got the portfolio definition cycle and we have the portfolio delivery cycle. So I'm going to talk about those next. So on the portfolio definition cycle, really what we're doing in this cycle is figuring out what are the change initiatives that will get funded and supported. So there are 5 practices in this cycle. And at a high level, they are to be able to understand what all the various change initiatives are, so at least being able to collect them. The other practice is to categorize them, so putting them into groupings, more for the purpose of facilitating decision making. So you can imagine if all of your change initiatives were in one category, you can see very quickly how you might be lopsided and you have to rethink about the types of change initiatives you need to have in the portfolio. Prioritization is then taking all of those change initiatives and figuring out which ones are achievable, which ones are affordable, which ones have higher benefits maybe than other ones, which ones are risky compared to other ones. You're doing all of that ranking of the various change initiatives to figure out which ones float to the top, if you will. And once we have those change initiatives identified, what we want to do is balance them. So we want to look at how those various change initiatives are going to impact across the businesses. So remember, we don't want to clobber the business too badly at one period of time. We want to make sure there's an acceptable way that we introduce change into the organization. We also balance in terms of risks and resources and money and all kinds of other elements to ensure that we actually have a delivery plan that will work. And the delivery plan is what comes out of, at the end of the day, which will get pushed, if you will, into the portfolio delivery cycle. So in the portfolio delivery cycle, really what we're doing is collectively managing all of those change initiatives so we have that bigger picture under our view, rather than just leaving the projects to be managed in silos. We want to actually take a collective look at them. So there are 7 practices that we'll go through in class, from management control and making sure that projects are actually proceeding the way that we expect them to proceed. So for example, if there are dependencies between projects and one starts to slip, we can start to see that we may have an emerging issue and we need to reprioritize, for example. We would also look at benefits across the portfolio, because really what we're looking at is, are we going to achieve our strategic objectives? So if we see some problem areas within some of the projects where it looks like they won't be able to realize the benefits that we needed them to achieve, we might actually take it back to the definition cycle and say, you know what, we're not going to achieve some of these objectives, so what can we do differently? Should we maybe reprioritize or change out initiatives, et cetera? Also, at a collective level, we're looking at our financial management of all those projects. We're looking collectively at risk, at stakeholder engagement. We're also making sure that from a governance perspective that decisions are being made and managed throughout the delivery cycle. And we're also making sure that our resources are being spent in the best place. So resources from anything from human resources to physical resources, whatever they are, we need to ensure that those resources are actually being put where we can get the biggest bang for our bucks. So what happens when you have really effective portfolio management is, the one thing you should have is a really clear line of sight. You should have the organization aligned both at the executive level and then down the ranks around what is it that we're doing, what are those projects that are important to us, and how are they going to help us achieve strategy, so that everybody has a really clear vision of where the organization is going. And, I can tell you from experience that when you have even lower level people on your team, when they understand why they're doing something, you have such a greater chance of getting them to buy in and do a better job and work collaboratively and all of that. So that clear line of sight comes with a ton of benefits. The other thing that you should have is transparency. So if your organization is working in silos right now and they don't, they're not really working on a common vision, the one thing that portfolio management is going to do is crack all that open. And it'll start to kind of bring people together so that they can see that bigger picture, see how maybe their projects fit into the bigger plan. And what I've heard from a few companies is that once they start to do that, you can see executives start to give up some of their pet projects under the understanding that some of these other things are actually more important to do. So that transparency comes with, again, a lot of benefits. Also, the collaborative working is another benefit. Having your executives working together towards common goals, having the organization kind of positively moving towards a similar direction. There's a lot of benefits just around employee retention and people feeling like they're contributing something that's meaningful, all of that. There's really good wins that come out of that. Practically speaking, we know that when we put common processes and practices in place, that there are efficiencies and savings that result. So by any kind of methodology that you use, we know that we're going to see those benefits. The other thing from an efficiency level, and I've touched on this before, is when you have projects that are and programs that are now being looked at collectively, you're able to see the impacts to the business and those dependencies so that you can ensure that any kind of overlaps or colliding that might potentially happen otherwise doesn't happen. So you're able to have a bigger view, if you will, of how everything is moving in the organization. And I think the biggest benefit of all of this is the fact that benefits are really the focus around portfolio management. Projects can deliver great end products. They can, give you the best technology, the most modern buildings, etc. But if you don't have a practice in place to really focus on the benefits, you never know whether or not those great end products or end results actually have the benefits that were argued for, if you will, in the business case initially. So what portfolio management is really focused on is having a really good front end of business case development that talks about what are the costs and the benefits of doing these change initiatives, using that information to guide the delivery of those projects, and always go back and say, are we still expecting to realize those benefits, or did something change? Did the market change, or did our assumptions prove wrong, or whatever, so that you're always focused on whether or not you're delivering on the benefits. And then, as we said, when the projects end, the Portfolio Management Office is there to ensure that those benefits are actually measured and are being realized. And if they're not, the lessons learned are incorporated back at the beginning in your business case development. So, from a portfolio management perspective, this is one area that, from an executive perspective, this is where you sell it. Because this is really where they see the benefit, if you will, of having something like portfolio management in place. The methodology comes with 7 steps as well to get you started that we talked through in class. So I'm just going to highlight them here briefly. The first one is just to get an outline of the portfolio. So going out there and figuring out what are all the change initiatives that are potentially going on in your organization. So if you don't know what these are right now, there is a template that you can use to go and collect all of this information. Once you have all of those change initiatives identified, what you're able to do is create that portfolio delivery plan, or that kind of 1-year plan that says these are all the things that we're working on, the start and end dates, the amount of money that they're going to cost, the benefits, the risks. You're starting to be able to look at all of those initiatives in a plan. And really what you're able to do then is to start tracking against that plan. So if you're managing, if you're looking at the portfolio as a whole and you see some of those projects maybe not performing the way that they need to, now you're starting to get a better sense of how that impacts the overall bigger picture for the portfolio. And the other thing that you're able to do once you start identifying all those change initiatives is to identify the dependencies between them and the impacts that they're going to have across the organization, so you can start to adjust if you need to adjust all of those, the timing of those different initiatives. And the other step that you can do right off the bat is the MOP methodology comes with the terms of reference for 2 committees, one that's aligned with your definition cycle and one that's aligned with the delivery cycle. And it's very easy to just set those governance committees in place, and they may not be perfect, but you can at least get them in place so you can start to manage your portfolio effectively. And then the 6th step is to define some sort of investment criteria. And again, this might not be perfect if you're just getting started with portfolio management, but at least something to define whether or not a project actually hits a certain mark, if you will, and is valid to be given funding to proceed. And then the last step is to implement a process or a technique that's referred to as stage release funding, where you're ensuring that the project is broken down into phases, so you can do some monitoring and controlling at those phases to say, are you actually hitting your targets? And if you aren't performing according to the plan, maybe there isn't funding for the next stage. or maybe you ask them to go change something so that they can realign and have a better chance of achieving the objectives. And really the theory there is that that's so much more effective than just handing over the big pot of money and hoping for the best at the end. It's a way that your governance model can actually do some monitoring and control along the way to ensure that you will actually realize the benefits that you need it to realize. So in my own experiences, just a couple of key points around how to be successful with implementing portfolio management or even maturing it. So if you're at a certain level and you're stuck and you're trying to figure out how to move it forward, one of the key things that you need, and we talked about this earlier, is that senior level sponsor. You need somebody who is going to champion for the whole idea of implementing portfolio management, because it in and of itself is a change initiative. So you need that person there that's going to help you build the positive energy, that's going to support you, that will, actually stand up to another executive when a pet project gets canceled or not funded, will actually stand up there and say, these are the right things that we're doing. It's really important that you have that. The other thing that I would recommend is that you have an implementation plan. Now, the methodology talks about how there's three ways actually you can implement. One is an ad hoc way, which kind of says you'll just do what you can when you can. So certainly no planning that goes around that. The other two approaches, one is to do kind of a full blueprint of your portfolio management function. So having it all kind of documented, figured out before you actually try to implement it. The problem is that when you do that, it looks like you're spending a lot of time and money and not getting a lot of value. So that's where those first 7 steps are more of an evolutionary approach where, you implement the first 7 steps and then you mature it from there. So what I would recommend that even if you're going to do, on an evolutionary basis, it's really important to have an implementation plan. You need to manage your expectations around what can I do in the first quarter of portfolio management? What can we achieve with the resources we have, and how are we going to grow it? And have that plan in place so that you actually have a bit of a blueprint, if you will, to guide you through, just like we would do for any type of project. And then I would recommend using those first 7 steps. One of the things that, it's been really clear to me that as soon as you have that dashboard, whether it's perfect or not, that shows all of those change initiatives, the light bulbs go off at the executive level. So you want to make sure that you're following some of that to get the early buy-in. Then you can start focusing on benefits and the benefits as well from portfolio management, not just the benefits from projects and portfolios. This little guide is quite interesting as well. This is one tool that I've used to try and sell the idea at the executive level. So the MOP guide, as we talked about, is about 100 pages, but there is an executive guide that you can purchase, and it's just a smaller kind of hand-sized guide that you can give to your executives. It's a short read, and it'll really help them to understand the benefits of portfolio management. So it's a really good communication tool. So if you are looking at trying to think about ways to sell the idea at the executive level, that's just something that you might want to talk about. Gartner certainly recommended it as well as a tool to build that executive education. Earlier, we were also talking about the differences between PMI and management of portfolio. As I mentioned earlier, PMI standard is set up very much, the portfolio management standard is set up very similar to the PMBOK in that it focuses on inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs. And it'll tell you that you should have a governance structure, but it doesn't give you any idea as to how you might set that up. And that's one of the things that MOP does, because it's a methodology. It defines the roles for your governance and your portfolio office. It defines your cycles and your practices. It's got all the documentation templates. It really fills in the blanks, if you will, from what's being talked about in terms of the standards on the PMI side. Also for certification, depending on how much education you have, you're looking at 4 to 6 years or 6 to 10,000 hours of portfolio management experience in order to be qualified to write the exam. On the MOP side, a little bit more straightforward. There are 2 certifications that Paul's going to talk about. There's a foundation and a practitioner level. So these, we do require that you do a bit of reading before class to get ready. And then there is an exam for the foundation level certification, a multiple choice exam, and then there's another more practical exam that's Leah Proctor for the practitioner level certification. And Paul's going to talk about some of that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and he's going to talk about this pretty slide here.
Thank you, Roxanne. Just very quickly, who's using MOP? Not just in Canada, mainly Canada. You see the top bit of the slide is that, but also a bit further down, United Kingdom, where we are, and Europe, the European Space Agency. So well used across the public sector, and also into areas of the private sector as well. So something that's really gaining ground. And in fact, in Canada, Canada accounts for 15% of all the management of portfolio exams around the world. So although this is a standard that originates in the United Kingdom, Canada is quite a hotspot for it, and an adoption in Canada is really coming on very quickly. So I started to talk about certification and training. And the way that you achieve certification is with one of the accredited training organizations, of which we said Advantage Learning is one. So we're accredited by MOP to deliver the official classes, and also by PMI. We're a global registered education provider with PMI, which means that in addition to gaining MOP certification, you will gain PDUs if you hold a PMI credential as well. So what's included in the training? Well, it's 5 days training with Roxanne. All the exam fees are included. That should say foundation and practitioner exam fees. But the point is, with some of the PMI qualifications, you tend to take the exam separately, whereas with MOP, the examinations are integrated with the schedule and the fee for the course. There's also, of course, the MOP guide, your exam certificate, and 35 PDUs. So the exams themselves, the exams are pretty well thought out. There are 2 different exams. First of all, the foundation exam. And what that's testing, or rather showing that you have, is the knowledge and understanding of MOP. And these things they're mapped to something called Bloom's taxonomy, which is an internationally accepted way of measuring learning and assigning learning to different levels. So levels 1 and 2 cover a knowledge and understanding, and this is tested with a 1-hour multi-choice exam. So if you're working in a portfolio management environment, you're a team member, you need awareness and understanding, then the foundation level is appropriate for you. If, however, you're going to be a decision maker, in other words, you need the skills not simply to know what is involved in portfolio management, but to actually practice and to apply and to make decisions in different circumstances, then you should move on to the registered practitioner level, which is a 3-hour test. And rather than saying, what is the name of this document? Is it A, B, C, or D, tick 1? You've given a portfolio management scenario, and you're asked to make appropriate choices. So it'll say something like, these are the stakeholders in this particular instance. Using MOP, which one should be included in your stakeholder management plan, that sort of thing. So you're going down to a deeper level. So if you're going to be responsible for executing portfolio management, then it's the practitioner level that you should consider. Roxanne mentioned a couple of resources, and what I've done is I've put them on our LinkedIn company page. So up there right now is the PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Portfolio and Program Management Survey, which, as we said, has kind of theme number one was talking about optimizing your portfolio to get benefits better. So there's a link to that up there. And also the MOP Health Check, which is one of the templates that is available as part of the MOP methodology. And what we did, we put that into Excel format for you. And it's just kind of yes, no, maybe type questions. And you can use it to just assess, you know, are you ready? What is your portfolio management maturity at the moment? So both those things on our LinkedIn page now, you can go and click those, get a link through to them. Okay, so on behalf of Roxanne and I, just thank you so much for your time. I'm going to open up the lines now, and if you want to ask any questions, or if you want to fire any in by text, then or using the chat application, that's absolutely fine. But I'll just open up the lines. While I'm doing that, you can just see on the page there, there's reference to our blog, and there's a number of articles about portfolio management there. All aspects of it, and so if you want to just read a little bit more, then you can go to that as well. All right, I think that's all the lines opened up. If you want to come in with a question, now's your chance. Right, well, just while you're thinking, there's one from David. Roxanne mentioned the guide. How do I get hold of the guide? Good question. It's published at the outrageous price of £10 British for a small executive guide, which we think they just attached the word executive to it and charged an executive price. But Roxanne and I were discussing this just at the beginning of the call, and we agreed that what we do is that anybody who came on the call, we just send it to you for $10. So if you want, and that would include the shipping. So if you want a copy or copies of that guide, just email me at my address on the slide, and we will post out to you the copies of those. And say the price for today, just $10. It's normally twice that plus the shipping. So a good way to get hold of a little bit of information that you can distribute and give to people. A couple of other questions that did come in while Roxanne was talking, and people were asking, is it possible to get hold of the slides? And yes is the answer. What we'll do is we'll put them into a PDF and we'll mail them out to everybody who registered on the call. So you'll definitely get a copy of those.
And this session was recorded as well, so are you going to give them a way to get at that as well?
Yes, we will. Once we're finished, we'll take the audio file. I'm not sure if they stream it off the WebEx site or whether we'll put it on our YouTube page or something like that. But we will make a recording available to everybody, yeah. Okay, any more questions? Janet, okay. Question maybe for yourself, Roxanne, saying, how could I integrate MOP into an existing change program?
I think some of the, well, I guess depending on what your change initiative is. So if you're, some organizations already have processes in place for, partial processes in place for portfolios. So what you may be looking at is, what is it that you're doing that may already relate to portfolio management, and then use the health guide to kind of help you figure out what some of those gaps are. What you want to make sure that you do is that, you know, if you've already got some change that's being implemented, make sure it's aligned from a governance perspective as well, though, so that your decisions are actually not in isolation of some of those other change initiatives. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
So kind of integrate it, don't impose it.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, that's good advice. Okay, any other questions? I'm not seeing any on the text. Okay, well, I'm going to close it then. I will say then, just again, on behalf of Roxanne and myself, thank you so much for your time. I will leave the text open for 5 minutes just in case you want to come in anything, but I'll close the audio side for now. And again, thank you, and we'll follow up with you soon. Thank you.